Mesopotamia, a land that lay between the two great rivers of the ancient world, the Tigris and the Euphrates, was a strip of fertile soil in the middle of a vast desert, a place where two mighty rivers carved life into a land that should have been empty. But this was not just a geographical place on a map. This was the most important turning point in all of human history, the place where the real journey of human civilization first began. Before this land existed, humans wandered the earth in small nomadic tribes. They hunted animals. They gathered wild fruit. They moved from one place to another, never settling, never building anything permanent. For tens of thousands of years, this was the only way of life that human beings had ever known. And then, in Mesopotamia, everything changed. It was on this very soil that the art of writing was developed for the very first time in human history. Symbols carved into wet clay tablets by people who could finally record their thoughts, their laws, and their stories. It was here that astronomy was born. Ancient priests climbed to the tops of their towering temples and mapped the movements of the stars across the night sky. Mathematics took its first shape here. The very numbers we still use today, the 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle, all of it began right here. Agriculture was perfected on these fertile floodplains. Crops were grown in surplus for the very first time. And for the first time in human history, people did not need to spend every single day hunting for food. Craftsmanship flourished. Pottery, weaving, metalwork. The first true craftsmen in history were born here. And the foundations of modern trade, the first markets, the first merchants, the first currencies, all of it began right here, in a single dusty corner of the ancient Middle East. This is the story of Mesopotamia, the land that gave humanity everything we now call the modern world, and the great civilization that time itself almost completely forgot. For tens of thousands of years, the story of every single human being on Earth was exactly the same. You were born into a small wandering tribe. You learned how to hunt animals from your father. You learned how to gather wild plants and berries from your mother. You followed the herds across the vast plains. You never built anything permanent. You never owned anything that could not be carried on your back. You never stayed in one place long enough to grow attached to it. This was the nomadic life. And it was the only life that humans had ever known. For nearly 200,000 years, this is how our species survived. Always moving, always hunting, always at the mercy of the seasons, the herds, and the weather. Then, somewhere around 12,000 years ago, something began to slowly change. In the warm, fertile valleys of the ancient Middle East, small groups of humans started to do something completely new. They started to stay in one place. They noticed that wild grains like barley and wheat grew naturally along the banks of certain rivers. They learned that if they collected the seeds and planted them in the soft soil, those grains would grow on their own. Year after year, in the very same spot, for the first time in human history, food could be controlled. Food could be grown. Food could be stored. This single discovery, the discovery of farming, would change absolutely everything. A small group of people settled in one place, with a steady supply of food, could now do something that their nomadic ancestors could never have imagined. They could build a permanent home. They could store food for the winter. They could raise more children, because more food meant healthier mothers and stronger babies. They could begin to specialize. One person could become a hunter, another could become a farmer, a third could become a toolmaker, or a healer, or a leader. Slowly, very slowly, these small farming communities grew larger. The tents and the lean-tos of the nomads were replaced by simple mud brick houses. The temporary fire pits were replaced by permanent ovens. The wandering paths were replaced by quiet village streets. And then, around 6,000 years ago, in a fertile land between two great rivers, something even more remarkable happened. These small farming villages began to combine. They grew larger, and larger, and larger still. Until one day, between the rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates, a new kind of human community was born. A community so large, so organized, and so advanced that humanity had never seen anything like it before. We did not yet have a word for what these people were creating. But today, 6,000 years later, we have a word for it. Civilization. And the civilization that they built would become the first true civilization in the entire history of the human race.
To truly understand why civilization began in Mesopotamia, and not somewhere else on this enormous planet, you have to first understand the land itself. You have to understand the rivers, the soil, the floods, and the very specific accident of geography that made everything possible. Because here is the thing that most people never think about. Civilization could have started anywhere on Earth. There are thousands of fertile valleys in the world. There are countless river systems. There are endless lands where humans could have settled down. But civilization did not start in any of those other places. Started here, in this one specific strip of land in the ancient Middle East. And the reason why has everything to do with the land itself. The word Mesopotamia comes from two ancient Greek words, mesos, meaning middle, and potamus, meaning river. Put those two words together and the name simply means the land between the rivers. But those were not just any rivers. They were the two greatest rivers in the entire ancient Middle East. The Tigris on the eastern side, a wild, fast-moving river that rushed down from the snowy mountains of modern-day Turkey, cutting through what is now Iraq, before finally emptying its waters into the Persian Gulf. And the Euphrates on the western side, a slower, wider, more patient river that traveled an even longer distance, winding gently across the deserts and the plains, before joining its sister river near the sea. Between these two great rivers lay a long, narrow strip of land. A strip of land that, by all logic, should not have been able to support a human civilization. Because just beyond the green riverbanks, in every single direction, lay nothing but burning desert and inhospitable terrain. To the west, the vast burning sands of the Arabian Peninsula. To the east, the rocky and unforgiving Iranian plateau. To the north, the cold, icy mountains of Turkey. To the south, the salty waters of the Persian Gulf. By every logical measure, this region should have been completely uninhabitable. It should have remained empty. It should have stayed exactly the way the rest of the desert looked. But the rivers, the two great rivers, changed absolutely everything. Every single spring, like clockwork, something miraculous would happen. The deep snow in the distant mountains of the north would finally begin to melt. And the meltwater would come rushing southward, swelling the Tigris and the Euphrates into raging torrents. These swollen rivers would overflow their banks. The floodwaters would spread across the surrounding plains in every direction. And then, after weeks of flooding, the waters would slowly recede back into their channels. And when those floodwaters finally receded, they left behind something precious. A thick, dark, life-giving layer of silt. But this was no ordinary mud or dirt. This was some of the most fertile soil ever known to humanity in all of recorded history. Rich in minerals, rich in nutrients, soft, workable, and absolutely perfect for growing crops. In other parts of the ancient world, farmers had to work for years just to produce enough food to keep their own families alive. They had to clear rocks, break hard soil, and constantly fight against the land itself. But in Mesopotamia, the very same fertile soil could be planted, harvested, and then replanted year after year after year with almost no effort at all. The land itself was practically gifting food to its inhabitants. And the rivers gave the Mesopotamians far more than just that fertile soil. The rivers gave them everything. They gave them clean water for drinking and for irrigating their fields during the dry summers. They gave them soft clay along their banks, which could be shaped into bricks and used to build permanent houses, walls, and temples. They gave them tall reeds, which the ancient Mesopotamians wove into baskets, mats, boats, and even early forms of shelter. They gave them fish, an endless supply of fresh protein. And perhaps most importantly of all, the rivers gave them roads, the very first highways in all of human history. Long before the wheel was even invented, the Sumerians built reed boats and floated their goods up and down the Tigris and the Euphrates. They could send grain to a city 300 miles away. They could trade pottery between villages. They could move people, animals, and ideas across enormous distances, all because the rivers carried them. In short, the rivers gave them everything that a great civilization would ever need to survive, to grow, and to flourish. The ancient Sumerians knew exactly how lucky they were. They understood, deep in their bones, that the rivers were the source of all of their good fortune. So they worshipped these rivers as gods. They built temples right along the banks. They wrote songs and poems praising the sacred waters that gave them life. They held religious festivals when the floodwaters arrived each spring, and they made offerings of grain and wine to the river spirits in thanks. And as the centuries slowly passed, the small farming villages that had sprung up along the Tigris and the Euphrates began to grow into something far greater than anyone alive at the time could have ever imagined. This was no accident of history. This was no random chance. This was the predictable, almost inevitable result of a land that was uniquely, almost magically, suited for the birth of civilization itself. The rivers had set the stage. The soil had given the gift. The geography had created the perfect cradle. Now it was time for the Sumerians themselves to step forward and write the very first chapter of human civilization.
Around 6,000 years ago, in the southern marshes of ancient Mesopotamia, a new kind of people began to quietly appear in the historical record. We do not know exactly where they came from. We do not know what language they originally spoke before they arrived in this fertile land. We do not even know what they looked like or what gods they worshipped before their journey began. To this day, the true origins of these people remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in all of human history. What we do know with absolute certainty is that when they arrived in this rich land between the two rivers, they changed the entire course of human history forever. They called themselves the Sumerians, and by the year 4000 BCE, just a few centuries after they had settled in this region, they had begun to do something that no other group of human beings had ever attempted before in all of recorded history. They had begun to build true cities. Not just small farming villages with a few dozen mud brick houses. Not just simple market towns with a few hundred people gathered together. We are talking about real, sprawling, organized cities. Cities with tens of thousands of people living together inside stone and brick walls. Cities with streets, with neighborhoods, with public buildings, with grand temples that reached up toward the sky. The first of these great Sumerian cities was a place called Uruk, and Uruk would soon become the largest city in the entire ancient world. At its peak, more than 50,000 human beings lived inside the great walls of Uruk. To put that number into perspective, that was more people gathered in one single city than existed in most entire countries at the time. It was the densest, busiest, most active human settlement that the world had ever seen. Uruk had paved streets made from baked clay tiles. It had wide public squares where citizens could gather, trade goods, and listen to royal proclamations. It had massive defensive walls that stretched for nearly 6 miles around the entire city, built to protect the citizens from invading enemies. It had warehouses where surplus grain and supplies were carefully stored for the lean winter months. It had schools where young Sumerian boys were taught to read and write. It had government offices where royal officials kept careful records of every transaction in the entire city. And rising above the city, dominating the entire bright skyline of Uruk, was something completely new in the history of human architecture. A massive, stepped tower called a ziggurat. The ziggurat was a sacred temple. It was built layer upon layer of sun-dried mud bricks, rising up toward the heavens. The Sumerians believed with all their hearts that the gods themselves lived at the very top of these towers. So they built them taller and taller and taller, century by century, trying their best to reach a little closer to the divine. Some of the great Sumerian ziggurats stood over 100 feet tall. To put that into perspective, that was the tallest building anywhere in the world for thousands of years to come. But Uruk was not the only great Sumerian city, not even close. There were many, many others, each one with its own proud history and its own unique identity. There was Ur, the legendary port city where the biblical patriarch Abraham was said to have been born. Ur was a wealthy trading center, surrounded by harbors that buzzed with merchants from distant lands. There was Eridu, which the Sumerians themselves believed was the very first city ever created by the gods. It was their sacred origin city, their spiritual birthplace. The Sumerians considered it the holiest place on earth. There was Lagash, a powerful military city famous for its skilled warriors and its ambitious kings. Its armies fought wars and won great victories that were carved into stone monuments for all of history to remember. And there was Nippur, which over time became the spiritual capital of the entire Sumerian world. The temples of Nippur housed the chief god of the Sumerian people, and pilgrims traveled there from every corner of Mesopotamia. Together, these magnificent cities formed something that historians today call a network of city-states. Each city was completely independent. Each city had its own king. Each city worshipped its own special gods, but they all spoke the same Sumerian language. They all shared the same culture, and they all traded with each other along the great river highways. And at the very top of every single one of these great cities was a powerful new figure that humanity had never seen before: the king. These were not nomadic chieftains leading small wandering tribes. These were true kings, powerful kings. Kings who ruled over tens of thousands of people with absolute authority granted to them by the gods themselves. They lived in grand palaces filled with treasures and servants. They commanded vast armies. They issued laws that everyone was forced to obey. They built temples to honor the gods. They controlled the grain supplies. They controlled the trade routes. They controlled the very lives of every single citizen under their rule. For the very first time in the history of human civilization, organized, hierarchical society had been born. Above the king himself, only the high priests held a place of greater spiritual authority. They communicated directly with the gods. Below the king came the nobles and the warriors who led armies and managed estates. Below them were the merchants and the craftsmen who created wealth through trade and skill. Below them were the farmers who fed the entire nation. And at the very bottom of this new society were the laborers and the enslaved. This was the very first true urban civilization on planet Earth. The Sumerians had built it from scratch, in just a few short centuries, on a land that had been completely empty just a few thousand years before. And now that they had cities and kings and gods and laws and a structured social order, they were finally ready to do something even more remarkable. They were ready to invent the modern world. There is one thing that you must always remember about ancient civilizations. Before a society can invent anything, before it can build cities, or write books, or worship gods, or fight wars, or paint pictures, or compose music, before it can do any of the things that we associate with civilization, it must first solve one single basic problem. It must figure out how to feed itself. For most of human history, this problem was so demanding that it consumed nearly every single waking hour of nearly every single person on Earth. You hunted, you gathered, you fought off other tribes for the same scarce food. And if the hunt failed or the gathering failed, you starved. There was no time for anything else, no time for invention, no time for art, no time for thought. But the Sumerians, in the rich, fertile lands between the two rivers, did something that completely shattered this ancient pattern. They solved the food problem. And not just barely, not just enough to survive on. They solved it so completely, so abundantly, that they began to produce something that no other group of humans on Earth had ever produced before in such large quantities. Surplus food. This is the single most important word in the entire story of Mesopotamia. Surplus. Extra. More than they needed. Because what surplus food does is it changes absolutely everything about how a human society can function. Think about it. In a normal hunter-gatherer tribe, every single member of the tribe had to work every single day just to find enough food to survive. The hunter hunted, the gatherer gathered. The mother nursed the children, then went out and gathered. The old people gathered whatever they could until they were too weak to walk. There was no extra labor. There was no spare time. There was no one in the house, no spare time. There was no one in the tribe who could afford to spend their day doing anything other than finding food. But in Sumer, all of that suddenly changed. When the Sumerian farmers began producing more grain than their families could possibly eat in a year, something miraculous began to happen. Other people in the community could finally stop farming. For the first time in human history, you could be a member of a society who did not have to grow your own food. You could be fed by the surplus grain that the farmers had grown. And this freed you completely. It freed you to do something else with your life. Some Sumerians, freed from farming, became tool makers. They spent all day, every day, perfecting how to shape stone and bronze into useful objects. And because they had so much time to focus on a single craft, they became experts. Other Sumerians became potters. They invented new ways to shape clay, new ways to fire it, new patterns and designs to decorate their pottery. And because they were full-time potters, they became masters of their craft. Others became builders. Others became weavers. Others became metalworkers. Others became merchants. Others became musicians, healers, scribes, soldiers, sailors, and priests. This was the very beginning of something that historians today call specialization. The idea that, in a complex society, each person could focus on doing one specific job and become extremely skilled at that one job. And this single shift, the shift from everyone hunting their own food to a society where each person had a specialized role, is what made the ancient Sumerians explode forward in technology and culture. A toolmaker who spent 10,000 hours making tools made better tools than a farmer who occasionally tried to make a tool in his spare time. A potter who spent 10,000 hours making pottery made better pottery than anyone who had ever lived before. A scribe who spent 10,000 hours writing on clay tablets developed an entire system of writing, organized into laws, contracts, stories, and poems. This is why, in just a few short centuries, the Sumerians produced more inventions, more technology, more art, and more knowledge than the previous 200,000 years of human history combined. Surplus food was the spark, specialization was the fuel, and the result was an explosion of human creativity, the likes of which the world had never seen before. By the year 3000 BC, the Sumerians had begun to invent the modern world, and once they started, they did not stop for almost 2,000 years. So now the stage was perfectly set. The land had given them rich soil, the rivers had given them water, the surplus grain had given them time, and the specialization of labor had given them an army of master craftsmen, scribes, builders, and thinkers, all working at the very edge of human possibility. Everything was ready, the fire was lit, and in the next few centuries, the Sumerians would use this perfect foundation to do something that would change the course of human history forever. They would begin to invent the modern world. Writing, the wheel, mathematics, astronomy, calendars, laws, schools, cities, empires. All of it was about to be born, right here, in this single, fertile strip of land between two rivers. This is the next chapter of our story, the Era of Invention, and it is one of the most remarkable chapters in the entire history of the human race. Everything we have talked about so far, the rivers, the soil, the cities, the kings, the surplus food, the specialization of labor, all of it was leading to this single, glorious moment in human history. The moment when the Sumerians began to invent the modern world. What happened next in this small strip of land between two rivers was nothing short of a miracle. In the span of just a few short centuries, this one civilization produced more world-changing inventions than the entire human race had managed in the previous 200,000 years. And it all began with the single greatest invention in the history of mankind: writing. Before the Sumerians, human knowledge was trapped. It lived only inside the human mind. When a person died, everything they knew, everything they had learned, every story they could tell died with them forever. For 200,000 years, this was the great tragedy of the human race. Knowledge could not be saved. It could not be stored. It could not be passed down reliably from one generation to the next. And then, around 3,400 BCE, in the city of Uruk, the Sumerians changed everything. It began simply as a way to keep track of trade. A merchant needed to record how many sheep he had sold or how many jars of grain he had stored. So Sumerian accountants began pressing small symbols into wet clay tablets using a sharpened reed. These symbols were called cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge, because of the wedge-shaped marks the reed made in the clay. At first, cuneiform could only record simple things: numbers, quantities, lists of goods. But over the next few centuries, it evolved into something extraordinary. The symbols grew more complex. They began to represent sounds and words and ideas, until eventually the Sumerians could write down anything, absolutely anything. They wrote down their laws. They wrote down their business contracts. They wrote down their religious hymns. They wrote down letters to distant friends. And most remarkably of all, they wrote down their stories. For the first time in the history of the human race, a thought could outlive the person who thought it. A story could be told 1,000 years after the storyteller had died. Knowledge could finally be saved. This single invention, the invention of writing, is the reason we know anything at all about the ancient world. It is the line that divides history from prehistory. Everything before writing is lost in darkness. Everything after writing, we can read with our own eyes. But writing was only the beginning. The Sumerians also gave us the wheel. Now, contrary to what most people believe, the wheel was not first invented for transportation. The very first wheels in human history were potter's wheels, flat spinning discs used to shape clay into beautiful pottery. But around 3,500 BCE, some unknown Sumerian genius had an idea that would change the world forever. What if you turned the wheel on its side? What if you attached it to a cart? Suddenly, heavy loads that once took 10 men to drag could be pulled by a single animal. Trade exploded. Construction accelerated. Armies could move faster. The wheel transformed transportation, and it has remained at the very center of human technology for the past 5,000 years. Every car, every train, every machine with a moving part owes its existence to that one Sumerian idea. And the Sumerians were just getting started. They invented mathematics, but not just simple counting. They developed an advanced number system based on the number 60. And if you think that sounds strange, consider this. Every time you look at a clock, you are using the Sumerian system. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. All of it comes directly from ancient Sumer, over 5,000 years ago. They invented astronomy. Sumerian priests climbed to the tops of their great ziggurats night after night, mapping the movement of the stars and the planets across the sky. They identified the constellations. They tracked the cycles of the moon. And from these observations, they created the very first calendars, dividing the year into 12 months based on the phases of the moon. They invented the first system of laws. Sumerian kings began writing down rules that every citizen had to follow, along with the exact punishments for breaking them. For the first time in history, the law was not just whatever the most powerful man decided in the moment. The law was written down, fixed, and applied to everyone. This was the distant ancestor of every legal system on Earth today. They built the first schools, where young scribes spent years learning to read and write the thousands of cuneiform symbols. These schools had teachers, lessons, homework, and even exams. A Sumerian student 5,000 years ago would have recognized the basic structure of a modern classroom. They developed advanced agriculture with complex irrigation canals, dams, and reservoirs that controlled the floodwaters of the rivers. They invented the plow, which allowed a single farmer to cultivate far more land than ever before. They created beautiful art, intricate jewelry of gold and precious stones, detailed carvings and statues, musical instruments, including the lyre, one of the oldest stringed instruments ever discovered. And they even gave us some of the simple pleasures we still enjoy today. The Sumerians were among the very first people to brew beer and to bake leavened bread. The recipes were carved into clay tablets, and they have survived for thousands of years. When you stand back and look at the full list of Sumerian achievements, it becomes almost impossible to believe that one single civilization could have accomplished so much. Writing, the wheel, mathematics, astronomy, the calendar, the first laws, the first schools, advanced agriculture, the plow, art, music, even beer and bread. The Sumerians did not just build a civilization, they built the foundation of every civilization that would ever come after them. Every empire that followed, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and ultimately our own modern world, all of them stood on the shoulders of these ancient Sumerian inventors. This was the golden age of Sumer, the Era of Invention, the brightest chapter in the early story of the human race. But no golden age lasts forever, and even as the Sumerians reached the very peak of their power and their genius, dark forces were beginning to gather on the horizon. The fall was coming, and it would be more devastating than anyone could have ever imagined.
For nearly 2,000 years, the great Sumerian civilization had stood at the very top of the human world.
Their cities had been the largest, their temples had been the tallest, their armies had been the most disciplined, their kings had been the most powerful. Their inventors and their scholars had given the world more new ideas than any group of people who had ever lived before them. By every measure that mattered to the ancient world, the Sumerians were untouchable. And yet, slowly and then suddenly, they began to fall. The story of how Mesopotamia died is not the story of a single great catastrophe. It is not the story of one terrible day, or one final battle, or one unstoppable disaster. It is the story of many small failures, building up quietly over centuries until the entire foundation of their civilization simply began to crumble beneath their feet. The first great enemy was the very land itself. For thousands of years, the Sumerians had relied on their incredible irrigation systems to bring water from the rivers to their fields. But over the centuries, this constant flooding began to do something terrible to the soil. It began to poison it. The river water carried tiny amounts of salt with it, and every time the fields were flooded, those salts were left behind in the soil. Year after year, century after century. At first, the effects were too small to notice, but over time, the salt began to build up. Crops grew shorter, yields began to drop. Fields that had once produced great harvests of wheat could now only support smaller harvests of barley. And eventually, even the hardy barley began to fail. The same fertile soil that had given birth to civilization was now slowly killing it. The second great enemy was the Sumerians themselves. The Sumerian world was made up of dozens of independent city-states, and although they all shared the same language and the same culture, each city had its own king, and each king wanted more power than his neighbors. Wars broke out. Cities fought each other. Armies were sent to attack rival city-states. Trade routes were disrupted. Crops were burned. Innocent citizens were killed in conflicts that should never have happened. The strength of the Sumerian world had always been its unity of culture, but its weakness, its fatal weakness, was its lack of political unity. There was no single Sumerian empire, no single king who ruled them all. And as the centuries passed, this lack of unity began to tear them apart from within. The third great enemy came from the outside. The Sumerians had grown rich. Their cities had grown wealthy beyond imagination. Their warehouses were filled with grain. Their treasuries were filled with gold. And from the dry mountains and deserts beyond the rivers, other peoples began to look upon these riches with hungry eyes.
The Akkadians came first from the north, then the Gutians from the eastern mountains, then the Elamites from the lands beyond the Tigris, then the Amorites from the western deserts. Wave after wave of invaders came. Sometimes they conquered the Sumerian cities, sometimes they were driven back, but each time a little more was lost, a little more was destroyed. A little more of Sumerian power slipped away. And the worst was still yet to come. Around 2000 BCE, the ancient city of Ur, the legendary city of Abraham himself, was overrun and burned to the ground by invading armies. The destruction was so complete that the Sumerians wrote long, sorrowful poems about it. Poems of grief, poems of mourning, poems that have survived for 4,000 years. These were the last great voices of the Sumerian people. And after Ur fell, the Sumerians, as a distinct people, gradually disappeared from history. Their language was no longer spoken in the streets. Their gods were no longer worshipped in the temples. Their kings were no longer remembered. The civilization that had built the very foundations of the modern world simply faded away. Conquered, absorbed, forgotten.
By the time the Babylonians rose to power after them, the great Sumerian world was already a distant memory. And by the time the Assyrians and the Persians came centuries later, even Babylon would forget the people who had once ruled this land. For more than 2,000 years, no one knew that the Sumerians had ever existed at all. Their cities were buried under the desert sand. Their temples crumbled into ruin. Their clay tablets lay forgotten under collapsed walls and shifting dunes. The greatest civilization in the early history of the human race had been erased from the memory of the world. But the story does not end there. Because in the 1800s, after thousands of years of silence, a strange thing began to happen. Archaeologists from Europe began digging into the dusty hills of the Iraqi desert. And one by one, they began to find them. The lost cities, the buried temples, the thousands upon thousands of clay tablets still perfectly preserved beneath the sand. And as scholars slowly began to decipher the ancient cuneiform script, the world finally remembered what it had forgotten. A great civilization had lived here once, a civilization that had given humanity everything. This is the final chapter of our story, the chapter of the Immortal Legacy, the chapter where we remember at last what was almost lost forever. When we walk through the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia today, we are walking through the ashes of the very first civilization that humanity ever built. The cities are empty, the temples are silent, the kings are forgotten. The Sumerian people, as a distinct nation, vanished from this earth more than 4,000 years ago. By any honest measure, the great civilization of Sumer is dead. And yet, look around you for just a moment. Look at the city you live in. Look at the laws that protect you. Look at the language you read. Look at the clock on your wall. Look at the calendar on your phone. Every single one of these things, every single piece of the modern world we live in, can be traced directly back to that small, dusty corner of the ancient Middle East. Back to that civilization that supposedly died 4,000 years ago. Because here is the great secret of human history. Civilizations may die, but ideas never do. When the Sumerian people disappeared, they did not take their inventions with them. They left them behind. And the empires that came after, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, picked up those inventions, refined them, and passed them down to us. Every word you have ever read or written traces back to Sumerian writing. Every wheel that has ever turned traces back to a Sumerian potter. Every hour you have ever counted, every degree of a circle, every law of every nation on earth, every school you have ever attended, every loaf of bread you have ever eaten. All of it, every single piece, is the gift of the Sumerians. They are not truly gone. They live in our cities. They live in our writing. They live in our laws. They live in our science. They live in every single second that ticks past on every clock on Earth. The Sumerian civilization gave humanity the foundation of everything we are. And in return, all they ask is that we remember them. So the next time you check the time, the next time you read a book, the next time you walk through a city, take just one moment and remember. Remember the people who lived between two rivers 6,000 years ago. Remember the people who looked up at the same stars that we do and decided to write down what they saw. Remember the people who built the very first chapter in the long story of human civilization. Remember the Sumerians, the greatest civilization that time itself almost forgot. If you enjoyed this journey through the lost world of ancient Mesopotamia, please consider subscribing to Aether Stories. Every subscription helps us bring more of these forgotten histories back to life and tell the stories of the civilizations that built our world. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the next chapter of human history.